Hello, everybody. Welcome to GM Joel's Chess Week recap on ICC. This week we have history made in the Russian Superfinal and the computer chess world, as well as a visit to the elite mind games in China. Peter Svidler took his record 8th title in the Russian Championship. Now, this one really seemed to come out of nowhere. Just a few days before the end, he seemed to be having a very ordinary tournament. He started with half out of 2. Then along the way, he defeated 2 tail enders. And an accidental victory over Vladimir Fedoseev in the penultimate round suddenly changed everything around. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to pick up the action in the middle of the game. Now, Fedoseev came into this game as a tournament leader with 6 points, and Svidler was 1 behind him. So there was really no need to overpress. Drawing this game, Fedoseev would have gone into the last round with a good chance to win the event. But look what happened. All right. We have his position after 32 moves. And so Fedoseev, it's just rook, rook, bishop, bishop, 4 points all on the same side. All right, now after f6, white could take on f6, or he could play, king f2. He could do whatever. It's not going to change anything. It's a drawn position. But Fedoseev decides he's gonna press for the win by sacrificing a pawn, trying to get a strong f pawn. But this backfires on him. It really only gives black some chances, although it still should be a draw. So after king f8, he goes rook h6, and this is not a good move either. And now black has an advantage as he chases the bishop. He's going to chase the bishop to a weaker square, and now the e-pawn is going to start moving. So rook f6 check. This is basically a forced move. And Svidler gives some checks. He's still not sure how he's going to win it. And in fact, he's not actually winning yet. But with the e-pawn, he has something to play for. So chases the bishop. And black gets his pawn all the way to the 7th rank. All right, but still, there's just that 1 pawn left. And black cannot afford to allow the white king to get in the game and then have a real solid blockade of the pawn. So the rook moves out. And this is where he gives away the game. Rook a5 check is a very bad move because he leaves the back rank, and he gives black time to get his king into the game. If he just waits with a move like rook c1, if black plays king f6, then white is able to play king f2. And he gets king f2 in, the king comes to the center, and he's able to draw easily. After rook a5 check, king f6. Now, what exactly did he miss here? Maybe Fedoseev thought he could play rook f5 check, but then king g6, even king g7 seems to win. You can't take the rook because of queen, and rook somewhere else allows rook f1, and king f2, black can take the rook. So can play rook f5 check. So he went back, but this by giving that tempo with the king move, this allowed the king to cross over. Once the king crosses over, black is actually winning. The e-pawn is unstoppable. Fedoseev tried to confuse the issue by pushing his pawn, but it doesn't do any good. Svidler just goes in and takes that rook. And he's easily stopping that pawn. He's going to bring his king back, so So Fedoseev resigned. Really, just a tragic loss for Fedoseev, and just really completely unnecessary. Suddenly Svidler was energized and in a position to win the tournament, and he defeated Medlakov in the last round, who was pretty out of form, but Svidler played a good game. And he was joined by Nikita Vityugov, who used a little explored variation to score a quick knockout over Sergei Volkov. So we're going to see that one next. Okay, so Volkov is one of those guys. There seems to be a few Sergei Volkovs. So this is Sergei Volkov 1. There also seem to be a few Vladimir Fedoseevs. So, but I think this is the main one. But Volkov did have a tough time. You could be something like 26-40, and get kicked around in a tournament as strong as the Russian Championship. All right, so he plays F3, which has been sort of fashionable for a few years. And Vityugov plays it in a way I haven't seen very much. So the bishop goes back to E7 rather, and the standard way black plays is E5, and white goes D5, and black plays bishop C5, generally knight F3, bishop G4, and so on. But Vityugov goes for C5, challenges the center that way, and after D5 he takes. Now already we have a choice for white. Which way he's going to take. Now, if he takes the C pawn, let's say bishop D6, knight F3, castles. White has these pawns in the center as a protected passed pawn, but black has a blockade on the dark squares. Actually, probably bishop B5 check is a little more exact to prevent bishop G4. Knight D7, knight F3, castles, and here this position is almost untested. Black could play a number of moves, possibly knight E5, but he does have a good blockade on the dark squares and queenside majority, so black is certainly okay. So arguably he takes D5 is stronger. It's very hard to say. Castles. And then bishop F4. Black could have played bishop D6 last move, but it wasn't really necessary to prevent this. Rather than bishop F4, more normal, I guess, would just be knight F3 and bishop E2 and castles, and again, a position that's fairly equal. There just haven't been a whole lot of games. I mean, it's interesting since it's a very plausible way for black to play. But bishop F4, okay. Volkov is pushing it. He's not really in trouble yet, but it seems that he wants to castle queenside. I'm not sure if this is such a good idea. Rook E8, bishop E2, bishop G4, queen E2, and knight H5. And now the computer suggests that white can be okay by castling. This is not obvious, though, because after knight F4, can't take the knight because of bishop G5. So you have to take this one. And after bishop G5, king to B1, looks a little scary. Knight somewhere, knight E2, but okay, white can play queen E1. Nothing happens, equal. All right, it's not easy to see that. Not really what he was looking for, but bishop E3 made things worse because now he's even in a worse position to castle. And if bishop takes G4, queen H4 check. If he plays knight F3, queen E7, no castling today. White has to play king F2, and black has a more pleasant position. But better than what happened. Volkov castled. This is really a blunder, actually. Rook takes E3, bishop G4, and rook takes C3. That's well, if you take with the pawn, bishop F4. If king B1, trying to cut the losses. Somehow black could play knight f6 and again have 2 pieces for rook. So Volkov took, and already it's really a matter of technique after 16 moves. 2 pieces for rook, but everything nice for black. Nice blockade, pieces all on good squares. Trying to mix things up by getting a knight to c4, but Vityugov is not buying that. And he finishes this up quite nicely. He starts attacking b2. And now a little tactic, knight takes d5. If queen takes queen, knight b4 check, intermezzo. So he takes the knight, check. He has to put the queen in the way or lose the queen. And Volkov goes to the bitter end. It was that kind of tournament for him. But we actually have a nice finish. Queen b4 takes and pawn takes. And Volkov resigns just in time, because after king a5, bishop c7, we would have checkmate on the board. So a nice way to finish the tournament for Vityugov, who tied for first with that game. Meanwhile, Fedoseev drew his last game and came up a half a point short. If he'd just drawn, that would have been good enough to get himself into the tie for first. He was joined by Daniil Dubov. And you might remember Dubov, like Fedoseev, started like a house on fire with 3 opening wins, but he cooled off. He had some scattered losses. And although Dubov won a good game in the last round, it wasn't enough to get among the winners. Svidler, meanwhile, he smelled pay dirt and took care of business in the playoff. The first playoff game made the difference, as Vityugov made a strange oversight in an unpleasant position. So we're going to look at that one next. All right, so after 44 moves, Svidler playing black is putting some pressure on white, and it's not an easy position to handle. I thought of rook e2 here. Queen takes queen, rook takes queen. So after rook takes f4, white can take on e5. But as the computer points out, it's just king f6 keeps some pressure on. Now, that's important that, a lot of players might say, well, let me take a pawn here. But then b3, white simplifies into, well, a known draw and ending 2 against 1. But, that's what he wants to get, but not easy to do it. Queen f3 is a computer suggestion with the idea after takes to take with the pawn, kind of straightening out those pawns. Black can take on f4, but again, this is white is in position where he can exchange off that queenside pawn and make a draw. So, he probably could draw the position with some accurate play, but very strangely, Vityugov played knight h5 check, and I'm not sure what he missed, because after takes queen g5. Now it's true that king h7, rook f7 wins for white. Queen g6 is no good. Even king h8 works because of queen h5, queen h7. Well, okay, then he gets to maybe thought that he'd have some drawing chances there, but simply king f8 basically ends the game. Queen h6, and now king e7 is fine, but also king e8, and Vityugov resigned. He's just lost a piece for nothing, and that was basically the ball game. Vityugov had a chance to square the match in the second game, but he played black and played very recklessly, because the draw did him no good, and he ended up resigning that one too fairly early. So lo and behold, Peter Svidler does it again. If you haven't followed his career too much, he's been a premier player for many, many years. But, the one place where he has really stood out has been in the Russian Championship. And, of course, there are a lot of great players in that country. And not all of them play in the national championship year to year, but still, for any one player, when you think of today's landscape, to win the tournament 8 times is really, really amazing. So, congratulations to Peter, who some years ago he would occasionally appear on ICC as a commentator. So he's kind of a friend of ours here at ICC, and very well done by Peter. All right. Meanwhile, a few of the other big Russian guns like Grishuk, Andreikin, and Artemiev challenged some other big names in the IMSA Elite Mind Games event in China. Now, this tournament was contested in 3 types of chess: Rapid, Blitz, okay, that's normal, right? And Basque. All right, what is Basque? Well, that's an experimental form where the 2 players face off in 2 games simultaneously, 1 white, 1 black. I can imagine that's probably something that's a lot more fun to watch live than to just play over the games, because they look like individual games, but when they're happening at the same time, it's probably quite interesting. All right, that Russian triumvirate that I mentioned, they each took a piece of the pie, with Andreikin winning the Rapid, Artemiev taking the Blitz, and Grishuk victorious in the Basque. Okay, so we're going to take a look at one game from the Rapid, with Andreikin facing off against the always a tough Shakhyar Mamedyarov, and winning a positional battle in good style, though there were some ups and downs. We'll have a look at that one next. Okay, so we have a Trompovsky in this game, and Mamedyarov plays knight e4, okay, in d5. This is normal enough, but after f3, usually black retreats to f6. If he does that, then white can play e4 and offer a type of black Mar-Demer gambit with an extra tempo. And black, in practice, very often doesn't take it. But he decided to go knight d6, a little something different. And, I guess sometimes the players maybe like these events where they're not playing serious games, because they can try out different openings, and I think to some extent they have to have a little bit of a different opening repertoire, because they tend to play so many more games when there's Rapid and Blitz and so on, that you can't really just be going with your regular opening repertoire. So we have some development, and then b5. Okay, so black is looking to expand on the queen side, and he has some ideas of knight going to c4, but I think he plays it prematurely. He could just castle or play queen b6 or even a6, so that his c-pawn can recapture on d5. But the timing wasn't very good with knight c4, because white took. And black can take with the d-pawn, but it doesn't look all that good. So he wants to keep the center intact, but after e takes d5, he has a problem, because c takes d5 is hit hard by knight b5. Problem is, black doesn't have time to simply castle out of it, because bishop c7 and knight d6 now wins an exchange. So he has to take with the e-pawn, which is far from ideal. Knight f5 castles. Now, there's nothing really earth-shattering here, and Andreikin just simply takes the bishop, and he gets to a position with bishops opposite colors, but his bishop is much, much stronger because it's dominating the dark squares, and black has some pawn weaknesses. So this is actually pretty cool. Knight b6. I like this move now very much. b4. A lot of people would think about b3, but that doesn't force black to do anything. He leaves it. This sort of gets almost a majority of pawns going on the queen side. White also has the possibility of pushing to b5 to undermine black structure. All right, bishop f5. All right, he moves the bishop away, so it's not hanging. And Andreikin, I guess after h4, queen g6, so he lets the pawn go. It's, of course, slightly annoying to let that pawn get up to h3. He just has to deal with it. Bishop c7. And now this is an interesting moment in the game because Andreykin, of course, has much the better bishop, but he decides to try to trade it in for a different type of advantage. And, potentially this is a winning positional advantage if Black does nothing about it. If you imagine if it's a past a pawn and he gets a knight into c5, that's going to win the game. But the problem is he can't simply do that. The knight can't go to a4 because the a5 pawn is lost. So it goes in a different direction, but it's not nearly as effective where it is. And also Black takes on a5, and if White takes with the pawn, then Black will pile up on that and actually will have a lot of play. It makes a difference. The knight on e3 is not in a position to be blockading all these dark squares. So White takes with the rook, but he doesn't get a passed pawn out of this. And the game is fairly equal for a while. That's a big mistake, g5. What should he do? Put the bishop back on d3. And, of course, the idea is Black wants to sneak the queen in. If knight g4, then Black can play queen f5, knight e5, queen e4. All right, threatening here. And now White actually has to force a draw. Rook f7, king g8, rook g7, and now a funny kind of finish, queen a7. That leads to perpetual. The king has to stay out of the way of the queen coming to f7. If king h6, White has knight g4. King can't go to h5 because of a fork. And if the king goes back to h8, knight f7, Black king has to go to g8, and we can see perpetual back and forth. Also after bishop d3, White can play rook a8, and Black can come back. And even though it's queen and knight against queen and bishop, Black is okay because he's going to plan to try to infiltrate with the queen on e4. And if White stops that, then the queen might come in on the a file. So the problem is White can't get in without letting Black get in. Now g5 was a particular mistake. Of course, you got to assume the clocks are getting very low now because White can play knight g4 and bring the knight to e5, and this is a different story. Now Black does not get the counterplay in time. Bishop g6 and something like queen d2 or g4 first is possible as well, and White is winning. So knight g4 was very strong, but even rook a8 is enough to preserve a definite advantage for White. Takes, king g7, queen b8. So that's a difference from what I was talking about before. The queen got in. Black had to let the queen get in, and now the Black queen doesn't get into White's position, and a trade of queens can also be favorable for White. So here Mammadov gets a little desperate with c5 and queen a6 to get in there. And now Andreykin makes a mistake because he needs to start with queen e5 check. Now if king f8, he can trade queens on d6. He's happy with that. If f6, he can check. And if king g8, knight g4 is big difference from the game, right? Queen a2, king e3, but now White is threatening mate in 2. If king h8, he can check and check and check, and then the king moves, and then he can take on g5, and he's able to bring the queen back to interpose if he has to. So White is winning in this variation. A little subtlety. Andreykin just move the knight, but now the position should be a draw. After queen e5, Black can play king f8, and White does not actually have anything better than a perpetual, it seems a little bit odd. But say Queen D6 check King G8. I mean, it's not that easy to see right away. But there's no mate for white, and black has such big threats down here that the best he can do is make a draw. But the way he played must have been very, very short. King H7. I don't know if he missed that move or he missed that move. Queen takes G5, sudden checkmate. So that's how it goes in rapid chess. Is sometimes you have these blunders at the end when time is low. I guess it makes it exciting. But for me, that was kind of an interesting positional struggle earlier on, with Andreykin first having the better opposite bishop, and then trying to get something with the knight against bishop. And Mamedyarov stood with him for most of the game, but then eventually it went against him. So there were three different winners in each section, and I didn't find any information about whether there was an overall winner declared, or they're just three completely separate events. They also had the same contest for a group of women as well. All right, finally this week, AlphaZero versus Stockfish. If you haven't heard, AlphaZero, which is a chess version of a Go program that thrashed the world's best players, AlphaZero was given the rules of chess, nothing else really, and tasked with improving by playing massive numbers of games with itself. It has these neural nets, and it keeps playing to the end and accumulates information. After 4 hours of testing, the AlphaZero guys decided to take on Stockfish in a 100-game match. And of course, this is like kind of unofficial because they just took an available program. It was, there weren't two sides to this match, really. So they just took a version of Stockfish and played 100 games. And AlphaZero won 64-36 with no losses. They released 10 games for the match, and we'll take a look at one of them next. This, I think, is out of the 10 games released, I think this is the 5th game. What the deal is with the other 90 games, I don't know. This is still much shrouded in mystery. But anyway, AlphaZero showed itself to be quite clever in the Queen's Indian, playing white in the Queen's Indian. And played this pawn sacrifice, which has been a main line for quite some time. Knight c6 rather, takes, knight f5, and knight c7, e4. Now in this match, Stockfish was not playing with an opening book, which d5 is a more likely move to play. Has been played in a lot more games, but still there are games with bishop f6. And what's interesting is that in a lot of the games, almost all of the games, not a huge number, but let's say about 10 games with knight c3 and about 10 games with rook e1, AlphaZero plays knight d6. Now, I admit that I was not able to put on my own version of Stockfish. I think I have Stockfish on a laptop, but not the one that I use for my work at home. So I have Komodo. Actually, I have Komodo 11, which I'm sure is very similar, not exactly the same, but simulates it somewhat. And I could say that my Komodo thought that this was, pretty reasonable for black. This continuation, which is largely untested. Why you sacrifice the second pawn, but the black position is very disorganized now. All right, so knight b7. And this is a very interesting moment because black can play d5. It's a very logical move. It's certainly a move that black really, really wants to get in because he's just all boxed in there. maybe especially from a human point of view. And h5, queen f5, g4, queen d7. I mean, this is, who knows what AlphaZero thinks of it. This is what my Komodo was saying, and it was giving black a little bit of an edge. Now, I have to say these positions are very, very complicated, and I found that it took a little while for, my Komodo working on these positions, that it would often change its mind. Stockfish got 1 minute per move in this match, which is not really taking advantage of the way that Stockfish works. But that's how it is, and I can imagine that you don't often see evaluation so wildly different after 1 minute than after the first few seconds. But I think this is a game where you do. Queen g4. This is an interesting moment. Black can play f5. Now my Komodo was saying queen back, takes. Queen h8. No way to treat a lady, to be sure. But this is what I have. Queen takes, king h7, and a draw by perpetual check. Queen e4, king g8, etc. All right, AlphaZero may have had different ideas. Who knows? It has not published any analysis of it. It's king h8, and boom, bishop g5. That's interesting for sure. f5, queen f4. If takes, and after running for a minute, maybe more, my Komodo was admitting that black is toast here. Queen h6, rook e8 is strong. Queen g8, rook e7, queen takes h5, g4. White has too strong attack, weakness on the back rank, and the h file is open as well. So instead, we saw knight c5. Now it just gets very crazy. The knight comes in and takes a rook. Lots of things get taken. White is in no hurry to take a rook. And now finally White gets around to winning that rook. Rook d5 seems to be pretty much forced. But now things are winding in White's favor. And bishop g3, this is very cool. It took me a moment to try to figure out the next few moves, but the basic idea, I think that White is getting ready to play bishop at e5 and maybe rook e7 or possibly queen f8 and rook e7, but basically just jumping in on e7, on g7. So I think c5 is to be able to answer bishop e5 with knight c6. So basically White wins an exchange here. And okay, one thing computers do is they find the way to get to some position where it's not going to be so easy to win the end game. Now the game gets very strange. Bishop takes d6. I just give a couple. Now it's move 38, right? I'll just give a couple more moves. Bishop c3, and that's all that I actually wrote down. So this is move 40. The game eventually ended in White's favor on move 118. Eventually Black resigned, and maybe they could have. Now I don't even know how they handled that resignation, but maybe when Stockfish got to a certain threshold, I don't know. But it seems like the game would normally be won in fewer moves than that, and I'm not saying exactly how I would do it, but it just feels like like it shouldn't take 70, 80 moves to win this endgame. So that was a bit curious, but AlphaZero did eventually win. All right, so it is, as the developer of Stockfish said about this, apples versus orangutans. Now, AlphaZero used incredibly powerful machines for this match. Stockfish, I believe, was on an ordinary PC, and the version of Stockfish was not the newest one. It didn't have the opening book, and as I said, the 1 minute per move time control is not very favorable to Stockfish. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't entirely a fair match. It was just like, okay, let's play these games, and if it comes out well for us, we'll tell everybody about it, I guess. And they had something to cheer about in the end. Now, for the practical applications, who knows? We don't know how much data about Alpha Zero they're going to release. Right now we know very little, and we also really don't know how it evaluates moves and positions. As I understand it, it just keeps playing a series of games with itself to determine the best move. Not at all like, computers certainly don't think like people, but the engines at least have an analysis process which is somewhat akin to what we do, so we can, use that to see, what the best moves might be. We don't have any information like that, so. So we don't know what it's all going to mean. They were talking to some of the top grandmasters about it. Sergei Karyakin was like, "Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to lay down $100,000 to get this right now." It's unclear whether it really would help him at all. Whether it's in any way accessible for a person. Kara Nakamura is like, yeah, I don't know if this really has anything to do with how we play, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see, get more information about it, and so on. But isn't necessarily going to change anything about the way things are done. But in any case, it's still very impressive and a bit mind-boggling that a computer can achieve such a high level without any advice whatsoever about how to play. It's just really amazing. All right, that about does it for this week. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin. Next week, we'll release a day late. Of course, it's Christmas coming up, and I wish Merry Christmas to everybody. Have a very enjoyable holiday. Hope you enjoyed the show, and you'll join me next time on GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC. Bye.